Wonderful. Great news. Okay. Well, at some point during my presentation, I might switch over to the phone video so that I can show you a prop or two. But for now, let's dive on in. Hello, my name is Jack. As Joe so brilliantly said, I am a paleontologist, a researcher at Monash University. Now, what does that mean? It means I love fossils of all kinds. I think for a lot of people, this means dinosaurs. That's the thing that immediately clicks into your head, as that's what it is. Huge, big animals like this, Triceratops, that we helped work on the exhibition for at Melbourne Museum. But for me, it's not just about dinosaurs. It's about lots of different things. The Earth has a 14 billion year history. The universe has a 14 billion year history, and Earth's 4 billion years throughout that have been filled mostly with life, even though it was unicellular or single cell organisms for most of it. There is so much time across Earth's history for us to look at many different really interesting animals. Now, my specific area of research involves scanning fossils, articulating them, reconstructing them, and turning them into assets like the one you can see here of a giant walking marsupial to help science communication in this field, to help show in museums, in public institutions, in lots of different things, how these animals look, how they walk, how they behave, and what that informs about those specific things. This is a giant marsupial, but today I'll be talking about giant amphibians. Our frogs, our salamanders, those are the sort of things that we see around today. And the largest of these, the Chinese and the Japanese giant salamander, they can get pretty big, up to about 5 feet in length. That's pretty enormous. But this animal that I'm going to talk about today grew up to 3 meters in length, and it lived during the Jurassic of Australia. Now, this is a pretty grainy video, but I think it's a very good example. If you ever watched BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs, this was the prequel called BBC's Walking with Monsters, and it described how life evolved from the earliest life all the way through to the dinosaurs. And you can see here that key transition from moving from fish, which were a hugely diverse group and still are today, to animals that could walk on the land, which is a transition that we really care about in the history of life. You can see the limbs growing, you can see the teeth developing, and these animals also started to be able to breathe air, which is, of course, pretty important if you want to spend some or all of your time on the land. Now, the animal that you can see here on the screen is a giant amphibian, and we call these giant amphibians specifically temnospondyls. They've had a few different names over the years. That's the name that everyone's sort of figured out by now as the one that we want. And this fossil that you can see on the screen right here is Australia's most complete temnospondyl. It's an animal called Siderops, and it was from around 176 million years ago. This is the only fossil that's ever been found of this animal, apart from a few very small fragments here and there, and it's beautifully complete. You can see the skull and the head and the lower jaw over on the left, the spine curving away over to the right, and a little bit of the pectoral girdle where your clavicles and your scapula are, scapulae are, and you can also see some of the limb bones as well. But it's not complete yet. Here's the challenge. Can I produce a reconstruction of this animal for people to see? Now, this is a cute little model. It is a Yowie. If you're familiar with Yowie models, the Yowie toys, much like Kinder Surprises, you get the chocolate, you break it open, you get a little toy. This is, to my knowledge, the only model of Siderops that has ever been sold anywhere. Ever been made or ever been sold. And it's good enough for the purpose that it has, but we want to be able to produce something, to be able to show the public, to be able to look at, hold, and say, this is the creature. Now, 3D models of temnospondyls have come a long way in history. This is a model of the very first temnospondyl that was ever reconstructed. This sat alongside those really crazy models of dinosaurs at the Crystal Palace exhibition in the 1800s in London. And those models are still there today. You can see the giant dinosaurs with thumb spikes on their noses and all sorts of funny things. And you can see that even then, over 150 years ago, we have an animal that has the sort of front half of a crocodile and the back half of a frog, and they were kind of getting the idea that this thing was an amphibian, but it also had big toothy mouth. They were very close. Honestly, for something this old, this is spectacular, but we're going to try and update it. How do we do that? Well, the first step is going from 2D to 3D. That step involves taking the scientific papers that we have published about this animal and turning them into a 3D model. Now, this is very difficult because most scientific papers, especially for fossils, if you probably have never seen a paper about a fossil, but usually what they do is in FEARS, they'll show it a couple different views of a couple different key bones, and that's about it. And those views don't necessarily line up with each other. You can have a side view of a bone that if you put it next to the front view, it doesn't have the same length or it doesn't have the right width or something like that. And it means that when we get figures like this, where you can see the scapula and the clavicles over here on the left, and then the lower jaws over here on the right, it becomes really difficult. So I developed a new method to try and reproduce these bones. First, I cut out those little figures, and then I brought them into a 3D modeling program where I used different perspectives and different, what we call landmarks, which are specific points on the bones, to be able to create a 3D model of the skull to start with. I also used the sort of silhouette outlines of the different views and then found the model intersection in order to start out with a sculpting basis for this creature. Then what I did is I utilized a feature which is normally used for painting on textures for 3D models to outline the specific surface textures that are really important to outline. So much like modern day crocodiles, these animals had surface grooves in the top of their skull and on their chest plates, which had sensory organs in them for sensing prey in the water. These animals were so big that they were preying on small plant-eating dinosaurs. And so being able to move in the rivers and lakes that they were in and to be able to sense things moving around them is super important. And this is a feature, these little patterns that you can see on the skull right now are a diagnostic feature of these animals, which meant it really was great to be able to include it. I'll quickly go through this other one as well, so you can see that the process is essentially very similar for most of the different bones. We have, what you can see right here is you can see this is your sternum. So your sternum is the bone that runs right down here at the center of your chest in between your two clavicles. That's the same for this animal, except of course, because it's sort of moving along the ground, its sternum is on the ground most of the time, and so it needs to be quite sturdy in order to support the animal's weight. Now, the last little time lapse I'll show you is for when you have bones of some parts, but not bones of others. So, for example, we only had some of the ribs of this animal. I wanted to have the full rib cage because, of course, you need it. What did I do? Well, I developed a different method in which I sculpted the ribs that we had, which were 3 different ribs along the bone and along the body. And then you can see here, if I sort of pause it at the right spot, let me see if I can pause it at the right spot for you. Here we are right here. Okay, so you can see here, I've got one on the middle. I don't think you can see my cursor, but you've got one on the sort of middle of the body there, and then you've got the final rib down the end. And what I did was I paired those two models together and morphed between them so that you can try and estimate what the ribs in between look like. And this is super useful for all areas of paleontology because we rarely, if ever, find every bone in an animal. And so it's very good to be able to say, okay, let's morph between these two bones, going from here to produce that full rib cage in the middle. So even though we don't have those exact ribs, being able to morph between them gives us an indicator. And there we are. This is the final reconstruction of the 3D skeleton of this animal in its sort of fancy little views. It's a beautiful little animal. It's not that little. It's 2.8 meters long. with a giant head that we call a dustbin head because it's got that huge big bin on the top for the head that sucked in the water and the animals in there. We know these things were eating turtles. We know they were eating lungfish. We know they were eating small dinosaurs. We found little bones in their stomachs. But this is the very first model of this creature that has ever been made. Let's rotate around it. So another feature in this presentation that you might be interested in is some of the videos in here, they might look like videos, but they're actually not. This is a 3D model that I've imported into PowerPoint of my own system. And it also means that at the end, when I show you some moving amphibians, you can also use your own animated models in PowerPoint as a nice free way of being able to, no matter what your research is, if you have a molecule building itself, whatever, it can still work in the system. You have them sort of moving around. You can see the chest plates, the underside of the jaws. Here we have the fingers of the hand. The hand has 4 fingers, whereas the back feet have 5, which is very unique to these animals. 5. And there we are. There's the full animal right there. And so to create a sculpt from it, what I did was I used a mesh to wrap around the skeleton to give the extents of a hull for the skeleton itself, and then started adding muscles and areas to that in order to see what it looks like. So even though this beautiful little green model down the bottom here is a little derpy looking, that is now our most updated outer skin structure for this creature. And we can tell by rotating it around and seeing the skeleton inside of the animal. Now this is very cool, but let's make it even cooler. What I'm about to show you, you might want to direct your attention to my camera, because this is our 3D print of this model with the skeleton inside of a transparent version of the sculpt. It's the first of its kind anywhere in the world. We used a very special 3D printer that we have here at Monash. Although this is a tiny little model, you can still see all the little teeth. You can see the eyes and the nose. You can see inside the brain case. You can see the ribs. And this is a perfect example of how this kind of reconstruction can be used in conferences, et cetera, to be able to hand someone a model and be like, this is what we are studying. Okay, that's the first half. Now let's make it walk. The first step in any sequence like this is to essentially do what most video game designers do and create a character rig for your model. Now, that's usually pretty simple so that a computer can handle it. Unfortunately, if you want to make a skeleton walk without making it deform and mesh weirdly, you have to make a digital bone for every single real bone in the skeleton. And so it's a pretty intensive, one might say, a system to run. And we're lucky we have supercomputers at Monash to be able to do it. But it means that once the model is complete and you can start posing it like it is over here, you can have a model which starts walking. And you might recognize this as the front view that was in that very first slide, but it's extremely useful to be able to import a model into a presentation. And once it's in there, it doesn't have to be taking up that much space. And you can still show any angle that you want. You can show the animations that you want. If I wanted to make it swim, I could. And that way, it's such a visual language for being able to communicate this science to the general public. And now we're going to see it sort of rotate and eat and chomp away. And then just as a little bit of an extra, because of course you got to do it, I rigged that to the model. This is a little bit of a faster version, but you can see the model moving and eating. Now, I haven't gone through and added textures to the skin or anything like that, because at this point we don't have much evidence for what that would have been like. But for now, this is as good as we've got. If you're interested in playing around with the walking skeleton online, this is a link, a QR code link, to a version on a system called Sketchfab, which you may not be familiar with. which hosts 3D models of all different kinds, where you can sort of, on your phone, you can rotate our little model around, you can zoom in, you can look at little labels, you can play and pause the animation, and it enables you to do a whole bunch of very, very cool things. And for the last little bit I will show you, I am just going to switch over to this video on my phone, which you might have to unpin my current video in order to be able to see. But if you go down to, let's see if it's here. Yep, you can see. Let's try and make sure I'm getting this correct. No, it's not working. That's right. I'll show it on my other one. You can see this banner down beneath me, which is the life-size banner of this creature. Which is pretty intense. I mean, you can see it's got a lot of different features, and that's what we're going to be showcasing at Melbourne Museum later this month. All right, well, thank you all very much for watching, and I welcome any of your questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Jack. That's amazing. I'm just in awe of your skill with that program, for starters. That's a lot of work. But also the products are just so engaging and tangible, and just, I mean, I'm not a huge delver in paleontology, but it makes me want to play with these things and give it a go and see what these creatures look like. It's incredible. So I do have please everyone share your questions for Jack in the chat here. And I have a question, which is why is it important for scientists and artists to reconstruct Australia's extinct species?
Thank you very much. It's important for a few different ways, in a few different ways. It's tricky. I think when a lot of people think about paleontology or think about fossils or extinct animals, a lot of things come to mind, such as you've got your Triceratops, you've got your T-Rex, you've got, if you're a little bit more familiar with other things, you've got like your woolly mammoths, your saber-toothed cats, or things like that. And these are very famous extinct animals, but none of them are Australian. And one of the things that I really like to do is to showcase our really rich fossil history here. And yes, we don't get the masses of bones that you get in places like North America, for instance, but we do have some really unique and incredible animals, much like we do today. And so being able to say that this is one of the largest and the youngest giant amphibians that has ever lived, and it's an Australian, it was found in outback Queensland, then we can be able to show, not just from a science perspective or from an art perspective, but both, how important these animals are in Australia's prehistory.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It's wonderful. Tony Kent says that this is super duper awesome and really useful for kids, evolution and animal behavior and speciation work. We would love to use this technology in New Zealand to activate our fossils. And he asked, how did you import PowerPoint?
That's a great question, which probably is a separate presentation on its own. But if you're interested, it's a file system called FBX. What that is it's a type of file that character animators usually use for putting a character in a video game. So you can create these things in programs like Maya, which is a 3D modeling software, or the one that I use, which is free, which is Blender. If you've ever heard of Blender before, there's a billion YouTube tutorials about it. If you're ever interested in giving it a go yourself, you can create whatever you want in there, and it's free. It's free to use, and it means that it's accessible for a lot of people.
Amazing. And that's exactly what Tony asked, was what modeling software you used. And he asked how to guide teachers and students to use it. But you said YouTube's the place to go for tutorials?
Yes, I mean, it depends slightly on what you're trying to do. So for a classroom, What I would probably recommend is something along the lines of using one of the phone apps that can enable you to 3D scan things. So some examples I probably have of that is the best one is probably Polycam, where you can use your phone's camera to take a bunch of photos of a model, and it will create a little 3D model in your phone of that system. You don't have to pay for in the free trial. I think you can get something like 15 models for free or something like that, which is more than useful for a school lesson or whatever you're trying to do. And if you've got your own fossil, if you've got your own little model, or if they've got a little toy like this Australian Diprotodon, which is the largest marsupial that ever lived, you can scan it and you can play around with it in there. So that's probably what I would recommend for a school context.
Fantastic, super helpful. Uh, and Joanna asked, how long does it take to create the model? How long did it take you?
Wow, that's a slightly depressing question. Look, it depends. Honestly, if you are an expert in this um, type of anatomy, which I am certainly not, I don't have an anatomy background. I have a conservation biology background, but and there are probably less than 10 people in the world who could say they're an expert on these animals. But I do think that it's a little tricky. I mean, it took me about 250 hours to make this model, in the sense that that was everything. That's everything from creating every individual bone, sculpting, meshing, articulating it together, rigging it, animating it, bringing it into here, all that sort of stuff, and then also making these little prints and things like that. Uh, it can vary. The marsupial takes a little bit less time because we are more familiar with marsupials today. We were able to scan wombats and koalas and things to be able to reference them. And then dinosaurs, actually probably even a little easier, because we have giant birds today, which are almost identical, and that they are dinosaurs. They're almost identical to a lot of the more traditional dinosaurs that we're used to, the non-avian dinosaurs, if you will. And they can take anywhere from sort of 50 to 100 hours, depending on what you're trying to make.
Oh, amazing. Grady says, thank you, Jack. Fantastic work. Is there potential for turning this into an educational game and pitch it to museum, for example?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I would love to. So I have a small exhibit that is currently running at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery in Hobart, which is on my previous work, reconstructing marsupials. This little orange model of a marsupial is based on one that I created for that. And it is kind of the same. It allows you to manipulate the 3D models. It also shows some 3D prints and some walking animations and things like that. I would love to, the idea of a game where you can kind of, I don't know, what would be a good example? Like a wall puzzle where you put up the different bones, or maybe some sort of AR system where you can get someone to walk alongside a dinosaur. These are all possible with this technology, but we just kind of need the space to do it in.
Absolutely. What's the next fossil to be modeled?
That's a great question. And so I am a PhD student, but this fully not my PhD project. This is just something that I've done as a hobby because I wanted to learn anatomy for these animals. But my actual PhD project is on, excuse me one second, is on this little Australian critter, which is even more ginormous. This is an animal called Kronosaurus, which if you've ever heard of a plesiosaur before, the things with those long necks and very small heads, same family of animal. These things had giant crocodilian-like heads that were 3 meters long, just the head. And what I'm about to do is study sort of sea turtle flippers and lizard axial vertebrae, that sort of thing, in order to be able to get this thing to swim and see what it looked like beyond just what toys can say about it.
Amazing. Yes, I distinctly remember seeing animations of those or the similar animal on one of David Attenborough's shows, I think.
Yes.
Probably the Monsters one or something. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Thank you so much for your talk, Jack. It's been really inspiring to see how we can show how these ancient creatures actually existed in the world. And all the best with your PhD studies. We
Thank you
look
so
forward
much.
to seeing how it comes out. We look forward to seeing your exhibits in more museums as well.
We shall see. We shall see.
I hope so.